PvT, so I'm actually not sure. I haven't seen too many PvZs on this map.
Well, we'll see how quickly Reynor's pool goes down, and that might tell us something. But let's introduce our players before we do any of that. Spawning in the top left-hand side in the blue, representing Italy and Clash Gaming, it is Reynor.
And down in the bottom right-hand side of the map, we have the red Protoss player. He is representing Razor Edge Gaming. It's PtitDrogo.
Reynor apparently playing from inside of a Kenny Rogers Roasters.
Yeah, no kidding. So worth noting, Submarine, the reason why we always talk about how it's just one of those maps and everything.
Please. Yes!
Is because of stuff like this. Like, this map is just so small. It encourages meme stuff like this. We had a pool first opening from Reynor. We have a hatch block over at the natural. And this is gonna actually pull a bunch of probes over here. Now, Reynor should be scouted with that probe on the other side of the map when the Lings eventually pop and start making their way across the map. But yeah, Drogo has to respect this and respond.
Absolutely, and his response is textbook right now, Ruby. 5 probes, 1 Zealot being chroned out. That's exactly the right amount of damage you need to do to this hatchery so that it goes down just before it finishes up. So perfect response here from Drogo so far. Cybernetics core to finish walling that off. We do see the Lings coming across, but it looks like only 6 of them down for Reynor right now, who's building a natural hatchery behind this and adding on some drones. I don't think he's going to go all in with this crazy attack.
Yeah, usually you're just trying to delay the natural. You're forcing a reaction out of your opponent. Keeping the drone alive is always very nice. And the dream here for Reynor is that he can get the drone over to the main base and steal the second gas geyser. That is the ultimate level of annoyance that you can do, where you've got the hatch block and the Evo chamber block. But Drogo's actually doing a really nice job with the second Zealot as well. Wow, okay, so the second Zealot is supposed to be here as a part of the wall, but he actually lets the Lings in for a second. Not gonna decide to commit over there. Reynor decides to back off, and the drone gets killed off. So Drogo handles this about as well as you kind of can expect to.
Yeah, pretty decent response there from Drogo, doing just about everything he needed to do, barely getting that Zealot back in the wall in time. Reynor, of course, that means he's going to be behind on workers now, 19 to 24. His tech going to be a little bit delayed as there'll be no immediate lair tech out. He's only on 1 gas still. So it does put Reynor slightly behind, but honestly not too terribly far behind. That's one reason that we see this build being a very popular, even in like high stakes situations. Players are still fairly comfortable doing a hatch block because it's not the craziest all-in you've ever seen in your life. It just puts you a little bit behind if it doesn't do maximum damage.
Yeah, these Lings being pretty annoying. They are wasting a lot of mining time over here, but taking that swipe from the Zealot does mean the Ling cannot really fight versus those probes anymore. So Reynor's just going to try and keep it alive to get continuous scouting, because around now is the time that usually tech would be coming down. Drogo has got enough gas to throw up his tech, but he is waiting until that Adept cleans it up, and now he can finally decide to build something. It's going to be a Robo and a Forge. Okay.
Now, of the 3 options that Protoss players have for tech, Robo Facility, Twilight Council, and Stargate, is it fair to say, Fear Dragon, that Robo is probably the least common right now in the meta?
Yeah, I guess I would kind of agree with that. It gets a little bit weird in how you evaluate it, because, you know, if you have like for example, an Archon drop, you're technically going Twilight Council first and everything, but you're still adding on the Robo to get the War Prism and everything. But I think, yeah, you're right. War Prism or Robo first is definitely the least common of what you end up seeing these days. So it'll be interesting to see where things go from here for Drogo. I feel like it's kind of weird, right? Because I feel like Drogo is one of the best players when it comes to having some prepared build that he executes extremely well. That is his biggest and greatest strength, and it has been for a long time.
Right.
But when Reynor does those kind of like cheeky moves against you, I feel like that's just a great way to throw a player like Drogo off and just throw him off his game plan, really.
Yeah, Reynor's one of those players, he reminds me, I think he and one of our previous competitors, Stefano, have that in common, where generally, maybe not in the last series, but generally, they're players who are always looking for the opportunity for that to stab you to like shank you in the side, right? To get that kidney shot, to get like the surprise attack, the Ling run by, the Baneling roll by, something that like catches you off guard, that disrupts you from your prepared build. And that's not to say that Drogo's not going to be ready for it. He's of course adaptable, as any Protoss player must be. But that's something we'll want to keep our eyes on here. Is Reynor's one of the best players at slipping Lings into places that Lings simply shouldn't be.
Okay. Well, just based on the units that we're seeing out here from Drogo, I am feeling like there's going to be some kind of light Immortal Sentry push or something coming on out. Yeah, there's the second Immortal getting started on up, and I'm expecting a Warp Prism after that. Probably some Adepts to also be made, and maybe he'll go for Resonating Glaives, but I guess there's also a chance for charge. I'm guessing Resonating Glaives is going to try and make a big push out here on a very small map.
Yeah, the very short rust distance makes those gateway pushes just that much scarier, because you're so much more easily able to defend your main base as well, should things go really wrong. But as the Twilight Council finishes up, we'll see what pops out, but absolutely correct. My suspicion is, Charge Lot actually coming out here. So a Charge Lot Immortal build, which is sort of the distant cousin of the Charge Lot Archon build that's very popular in some matchups. What do you think about Charge Lot Immortal here, Robbie?
No, I mean, it can definitely be pretty strong as well. I was thinking Adepts, because you already had a few that were made, and I didn't see any more Zealots coming on out, but I really don't hate this at all. The only thing that does get a little bit interesting here is that Reynor has actually started his Roach production a little bit early before he was like, okay, are you coming out with some attack? He saw the Robo, and I think was anticipating that something might be happening a bit earlier. But Drogo's actually going to even add on the Temple Archives. So he is actually going to be waiting a surprising amount of time over here. The Warp Prism will pop out. I think the Temple Archives should be finishing up around the time he's across the map, around the same time the charge would be finishing. And he can warp in the first round of Archons and then just go. So I feel like Reynor, he really has to respect this, but he's actually making 11 more drones right now. Now he's going to move in with the Overseer, and he's going to see all of the gateways that have been produced.
How many gateways has Drogo made? Yes. All of them.
Yes, that is the best way to put it, actually, Creighton.
Well, +2 about halfway done here for Drogo. Ravi, what do you think about the choice to go for +2 attack instead of +1 armor for the ground units? Very often you see players going for a Zealot heavy composition. They'll add that armor in instead to give the Zealots a bit more bulk. Do you like the +2 attack instead?
I feel like +2 weapons is usually the smarter call in PvZ. I think it usually is going to be a bit more effective, especially when you're dealing with like Zealots and Archons, or just having that extra DPS, especially for the Immortals. But here we go, a couple of the Corrosive Vials being thrown down, landing on some of the Zealots over here, but a lot of creep going to get cleaned up first. Archon's going to be added into the mix as well to deal with any of those Lings. Nice set of force fields as well. Going to be able to snag a handful of these Roaches over here. Good control so far from Drogo, but does he actually have enough here?
A bit of a struggle from Drogo. This is a really tricky unit composition to deal with as a Protoss player when you're attacking. You've got to have those Archons up front soaking up damage, but you can't have them get in the way of the charge lots. If you see any charge lots bouncing around in the back of the army, or any Immortals that are trying to like waggle around and try and get more damage done, it's just not the most efficient attack, and it looks like Reynor may just have too much here. The charge lot's getting pushed back, but this Warp Prism could be dangerously close to getting Corrosive Vial down. There's a very thin veneer of Zealots to keep those Ravagers away.
Yeah, very important that remember, Reynor has to keep these Ravagers alive, and now that he finally gets close enough to the Warp Prism, Drogo has to unstage the Warp Prism. You're starting to see that Reynor piles on this pressure, counter doing the damage, pushing Drogo back across the map. I want to remind you guys that Drogo wasn't exactly making a ton of probes. He wasn't getting up Storm. He wasn't making transition points. Reynor had gotten a ton of drones before all of this happened. He had a 4th base up. Reynor's in a fantastic spot after the defense. Like, this is a phenomenal spot for Reynor.
And I think it shows in exactly what Drogo's devoting his attention to. We saw him warping in a couple extra units down at that 3rd base to try and defend, and then moving his whole army down there as well. To me, that says the Protoss player is a little scared, responding that heavily to just 5 Roaches in the 3rd. Now, little moves like this are going to be really cute here. The Immortals picking off some of the reinforcements from Reynor, and with the Corrosive Vials, the only opportunity to snipe that Warp Prism out of the air. Drogo should be able to keep this alive for a little bit longer, but I think that's a nuisance. And the real problem right now is this 3rd base attack from Reynor.
Yeah, and he doesn't even necessarily have to kill the 3rd base. He's picking off some units here and there, especially if he's able to power through the Zealots and start taking out some of the Archons or the Immortals, wasting Sentry force field energy. This is all great because Reynor's already basically maxed out at this point. He's getting additional upgrades, so he can continue to just power up more Roaches. It's not like he needs to actually make more drones. He's at 80. This is the comfortable zone already for Reynor.
Yeah, no question. He's feeling very confident where he is right now. One thing to point out for Drogo is that he's actually done a pretty good job saving his army. He's only lost, I think, 2 Immortals and 2 Archons right now. So he's done a pretty good job keeping those high-value units alive, but I suspect he's done so at the cost of losing more Zealots than he probably needs to and taking more damage in these attacks. So, again, maybe playing a bit too cautious here, and then that's going to lead to things like this, where these now Tunneling Claw Roaches have taken on the 4th base, and I'd love to see some cute Tunneling Claw play from Reynor here.
Yeah, and I don't even blame Drogo for losing that 4th base, right? He's already playing from a situation where he's already behind. Like, he doesn't actually have the units to spread out to that 4th base. Like, what was he going to do? Send 2 Immortals and a handful of the Zealots over to the 4th base? Well, then actually the 3rd base gets just broken. And now we end up having this harassment. There's nothing Drogo could realistically do to handle all of the aggression with the way the Reynor's playing.
Yeah, Reynor's, as we said earlier, just able to be everywhere at once, in the main, in the natural, in the 3rd base. We're seeing now the long, slow decline of PtitDrogo as he's very low on probes, and his army supply at about half that, less than half that, about half that, of PtitDrogo. And here now we finally see these Tunneling Claw Roaches trying to zone some of the units from Drogo out, popping up on top of the Immortals. It reminds me of how Blink Stalkers get right on top of the tank and take it out. We see those Roaches coming in and popping right on top of the Immortals. And now again, I think it's going to be similar to the last game, where we're just going to watch Drogo sort of bleed out slowly over the next couple of minutes.
Yeah, it's a brutal way for game number 1 to go, as Reynor really just asserting his dominance. I've got to commend Reynor. I actually really was worried for him with that big attack that Drogo was going for. I really believed, Reynor, he maybe over-droned a little bit. He was up like to 60-some drones with this big attack coming out from Drogo off of, the 8 or so gateways, charge lots, Archons, a lot of Immortals in the mix. But Reynor just has such a great sense of exactly how many drones he was going to be able to make. He had the exact right positioning to deal with the charge loads at that choke point. Just a phenomenal job by Reynor, and that earns him this insanely good position. Like, it's all off the back of that.
Absolutely correct. It's something we see a lot in these young StarCraft players, because we have so many young players coming up right now. And I mean young like in just age-wise. Clem, Max Pax, Reynor, all under the age of 20, and just destroying the StarCraft scene right now, in addition to, I'm sure, tons of others. But one thing we see with younger players, they tend to be more aggressive, right? So for the last 5 minutes, Reynor's just been choking Drogo out. He's pushing him back here now, able to take out the Zealots, and he's not like trying to go for the throat. He's just like, you know what? I can sit back, I can choke you out, and I can wait for you to GG on my time, not on yours. And really smart play there from Reynor to take his time and be really patient getting that victory in game number 1.
Yeah, just absolutely stellar play there from Reynor. I really like the idea that Reynor approached the series by saying, Drogo, you don't get to do your unbelievably well executed builds, because that is the way that Drogo could sneak in a game or a series in on Reynor. And if you just get in his face, especially on a map like Submarine, like, I still don't know who ended up picking that map out. I feel like usually I would guess the Zerg player or something, but that's just the map that you get to be very annoying. It's really short rush distances. You throw your opponent off, you force them to do this like out of the way build order that throws off some of your timings, and Drogo doesn't get to do like a super crisply timed and executed build that he normally would. So I think that map kind of dictates the way that things go a bit. I think the way that Reynor opened it dictates a lot of that. I'm hoping that Drogo's not going to be too thrown off, because I know he's a kind of emotional guy. He definitely gets very invested into how these games go, and I hope he can approach game number 2 onto a more normal map like Everdream in a good mindset.
Yeah, just confirming really quick that graphic down below us does show that Reynor did in fact choose Submarine as his first map. So
yeah,
after the 4 bans, Reynor grabbing that one, and then Drogo on Everdream. And should we need a game 3, it'll go into Pillars of Gold. So more standard maps here in games 2 and 3. As we get into Everdream, what do you think, Rubby? Can Drogo fix this?
Ah, man, again, like, it's really tough, because I was talking about this before. Drogo's form is hard to predict on like a daily basis, right? So 3 days ago, Drogo could be top of the world. Today might not be playing that well, and then 3 days from now could be playing again top of the world. Right. But I do think his form on like within that day is usually kind of telling. I don't think that Drogo actually played unbelievably terribly that last game, but I'm still a little bit concerned that Drogo's gonna have that last loss affecting him. I'm really hoping I'm wrong on that though.
Yeah, and Drogo, we should point out, already at 1-1 here in the match score in the group. So as we get into Everdream, we got to keep that in mind, that really Drogo desperate for a win here in game number 2.
All right, well, we're going to be starting over here in the top right-hand side of the map. Top of the blue Zerg player, he is Reynor from Team Clash.
And in that bottom left-hand side in the red, representing France and Raise Your Edge Gaming, it's our Protoss player, PtitDrogo.
Yeah, and I want to say, like, I do feel you to an extent. Like, you know, yeah, Drogo's going to be 1-1. This is definitely an important match. Like, if he can beat Reynor, that's massive. Even, like, taking maps off of Reynor is really going to help you in the long run.
Oh, yeah.
We're still early on in enough of the groups. I don't think that if Drogo loses to Reynor, if anyone in this group loses to Reynor, I don't think they're like, oh my God, how could I let this happen? Like, I lost to Reynor. How bad at StarCraft? I don't think Drogo's gonna be thinking that to himself. Like, I think he'll be okay. This is one of the matches that it's like, if any games you take off of Reynor are a really nice plus, but you're expecting to beat everyone else in the group. So, like, I think this is kind of one of more like those, it's like a free tile space where it's like, hey, maybe I get something, maybe I don't, but we'll just do what we can.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting you point out how important these maps are. Even taking a map off Reynor could be a huge deal, because remember, guys, these players are going to play 7 games each, which means it's very likely we'll see many players at either a 4-3 or a 3-4 score in the group stages. And if the players are tied on their match score, then we will use map score to decide who moves on. So I feel like we always get to day 7, Ravi, and we're like, oh, these players are tied up, they're even, but you know, X player is 1 map ahead of the other player. Oh, that other player shouldn't have lost that map against somebody else 4 days ago. That's what sunk them now at the end of the group stage.
Yeah, though the end days for all of these round robin groups, every single time comes down to the wire. It comes down to maps. It comes down to the narrowest of narrow victories, almost every single time. So I think every map is going to matter for sure in that regard. Now, just taking a quick look at things, we did see Drogo able to force the 3rd base to be taken instead of the natural really quickly with that early probe scout. That's something a lot of pros players just love doing these days. They like to just spread out those bases a bit. It hurts the economy because you have to transfer drones a longer distance, so they're not mining as early on. And it also can make some of these later attacks a bit more effective depending on how you're able to mess with the creep spread. And Reynor's going to be spreading his creep forward from the 3rd base, not like connecting his bases immediately. So there's an opportunity for these adepts early on to maybe do a little bit extra.
Yeah, definitely. Not just these first 2 adepts, but it does look like back home for PtitDrogo. He's gone for a Twilight Council opener followed by Robo. So likely to see glaive adepts, but if we don't see that glaive upgrade starting soon, we might just see the Dark Shrine going down to go for the immediate Dark Templar into Archon play out of Drogo. And by spreading Reynor out to that 3rd base, it means that he's going to be a lot less mobile and have a lot more ground to cover. So these early game gateway units could do a little bit more damage. There it is. Glaive adepts for Drogo.
Nice control so far from Reynor. Oh, those links gonna catch the adepts actually in the center right there. Ooh. Catches 1, catches the 2nd. Oh, that's gonna hurt. It's not the end of the world to lose those first 2 adepts, but it's not comfortable because, yeah, now you got 1 stalker to deal with a decent number of these links, so the adepts have to be warped in defensively here. And as soon as you see that as Reynor, and you've also seen the Twilight Council already, you're like, oh yeah, you're going glaive adepts. This is like the super meta thing to do anyways. All right, let's throw down the Rotor and let's get ready for this. I know exactly what's coming.
Yeah, great read there by Reynor. Losing those 2 adepts early is rough because remember, 2 adepts can one-shot a worker. So losing 2 adepts means that you've got 2 fewer adepts going into that 3rd base when the big attack comes after the warp prism is out. And that just means however much time those adepts would have stayed alive, multiply that by the number of workers that you could have killed, and it's a huge disadvantage later and later in the game. Remember, every unit you lose earlier in the game is more important than units you lose at the end of the game, just because their value over time.
Yeah, I wonder if Drogo is just going to try and do a non-committed version of this. He's gone back into the Immortals, which usually I feel like you don't actually start powering out a ton of Immortals until just after your attack is kind of beginning.
Correct.
But with the first Immortal nearly halfway done, he's warping in just a few adepts. I actually would really like the idea of him just continuing to actually power out more probes. He's already going up to 45, which I think is 1 more than you'd sometimes see if this is like light aggression. And remember, Reynor actually made a lot of units early on. This might actually just be the right move here for Drogo. It says, well, you committed a lot of defensive units already. Like I kind of already did indirect drone damage. Let me just take a third and be okay, but still no third on the way just yet.
Yeah, clearly some unorthodox play out of Drogo. Normally you'll see, more standard at least, you'll see the Protoss players sieging up that warp prism outside the third base of the Zerg player and just warping in several rounds of adept going in 10, 12. Oh no, 10, 12 at a time. But that's a huge mistake from Drogo, losing that observer, which was, I think, on follow command with the warp prism, because you want to use the observer next to the warp prism to clear creep with those adepts. And now Drogo pinned in the back corner of Reynor's base, the warp prism and 3 adepts. He's working on +1 in charge and throwing down, 4 additional gateways back home to deal with the flood that's coming out from Reynor.
Yeah, and no more workers actually being made right now. Drogo is looking to try and throw down a third base. I don't know how serious of a third base this really is. He might just be looking to actually pile on the aggression. This is one of those like quasi-fake third bases potentially, where it's there, it sells the story that this is an expansion and maybe gives an opportunity to transition out if he does only some damage. But I feel like this might be a bit more committed in an attack. Like he's still not making workers right now.
Yeah, either way, it's bad news for Drogo, I think, because if we look, as soon as Reynor saw that third base going down, what popped up in his production tab? Immediately, +1 missile attacks, roach speed, and now a 4th base. Reynor is, I think, calling Drogo's, if it is a bluff indeed, Reynor's calling that bluff and saying, oh, you're going to expand? Okay, me too. I'm going to tech up, I'm going to expand, and I'm going to get back up to that massive roach army that you couldn't deal with last game, and I'm going to hit you with it again this game.
Yeah, but I mean, again, like this is a little bit of a fake out here from Drogo. He really wants to commit to this attack. One immortal going to be left behind. That's interesting. I guess he's worried about a potential counterattack, which I mean, he's right to be so, do so. There was an attempt at a counterattack there, so the immortal will be able to hold strong for a little bit. This base on the low ground is going to immediately get killed, not canceled, so not a bad start here for Drogo. I actually feel like it's still going to be really tough, but this is about the best situation that Drogo could have asked for, where he's prepared on the counterattack defense. He's also going to be catching Reynor, where he was droning up a lot more, and these charge loss going to be able to catch a handful of these units. Not able to kill anything, though.
Yeah, and a big mistake from Drogo here is that his Warp Prism is not with this initial fight. Every Protoss player will tell you that Immortals and Warp Prisms go together like peas and carrots. You've got to have them in that same army to micro the Immortals back. Not having them just means that you really can't not only sustain the attack with additional Warp-ins, but also micro the Immortals back and forth. And unfortunately for Drogo, I think that's all it would have taken to really make that a scary attack on the third base. And instead, he's going to move it back up into the main to spot the Evo Chamber and Vaping Nest going right down for Reynor here.
Yeah, and I mean, I like the move there from Drogo. That is the kind of move that tries to buy time. It prevents this army from immediately just moving out if Reynor hadn't already, but Reynor's on point. He already knows that there's an opportunity to get something done over here. He's sniping off Zealots. He's going to force more Warpins of them. And even after those Zealots are gone, well, now the Sentries are exposed. Now the Archons are exposed. Now the Immortals are getting closer and closer to taking some damage. Reynor is bleeding off a lot of Roaches over here. It doesn't seem like he has any reinforcements coming fast enough. I think there are some Lings on the way. I don't think he has any anti-air, unless he gets the most lucky corrosive vials ever. You shouldn't be able to kill that Warp Prism.
No.
Drogo. Oh.
Yeah, that just makes your heart pitter-patter as a Protoss player or a lover of StarCraft. You'd hate to see a game end like that. And Fear Dragon, you hate to see a game end like this, too. A flood of Lings up into the main base. We're going to see significant probe damage now as the main fight goes on outside of PtitDrogo's third. But Drogo simply doesn't have any gateway units here to deal with it. He's just done a big warp in back home to deal with the Lings. And that means that all his valuable robo units are exposed outside the third base. Again, we see Reynor winning on not one, but 2 different fronts of battle.
Reynor and Ling run by. It just will happen every single time. He will be there the moment that you do not have that Zealot in the wall. You will find the opening, and you will find a good bit of damage. I have to say, Drogo actually cleans this up with a lot less damage than I would have expected, but he still ends up losing almost everything on the other side. That's where the damage really ends up happening. Mortal Hardened Shield's going to keep it alive for a little bit longer, but there's no shield batteries or anything over here to help out. Reynor is just piling on more and more. He's nearly doubling the supply at this point. And with a 1-0 lead, this is all Reynor needs to take the 2-0 series.
I've been trying to keep my eyes on the player cams every now and then. Reynor is literally licking his lips over there at the prospect of this victory. He knows he's so close here. Outside the third base, he will be driven back, but look at the army supply alone. Now, the army value actually not as different as you might think, given that army supply, but really, it doesn't matter at this point. Lings are a natural predator of Immortals. If they can get a surround on Immortals and Archons, there's just nothing your opponent can do. And 11 more probes go down. I mean, what is there left for Drogo at this point? Is there any way out for him right now, Fear Dragon?
You look for the moral victories at this point, Creighton. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Reynor is so far ahead right now. With 80 workers, he's going for the Spire. Like, this is going to be a little bit of a magical finish for him as he just makes a ton of Banelings to look to try and end this game with a bang. Literally, with a big bang of a bunch of Banelings. If Drogo sees how many Banelings there are, there's actually even a chance that he will just tap out, but I think the Banelings just split up. Half of them going over toward the natural, or coming in from the natural over for a nice little flank. Sets off all of the Immortal Hardened shields over here. Roaches and Ravagers also come pouring on in. Drogo coming to terms with his mortality here against the god Reynor. GG.
Well, the bad news for PtitDrogo